One of the easiest mistakes to make in security is assuming that because you didn't build something, you don't own the risk. But software doesn't care where responsibility ends. If your application trusts it, your application inherits it. That's true whether we're talking about an identity provider, an open source media library, a third party SaaS integration, or even the internet connection an attacker chooses to hide behind. This is Initial Access. I'm Sean McMillan, Community Manager here at Bishop Fox, and this week I am joined by Sergio Villegas, Senior Managing Analyst 2, Chad Malloy, Senior Managing Consultant 2, and Kendrick Urbaniak, Senior Operator Exploit Development. I am the only non-senior person here, so take it easy on me. Later in the show, we are going to be speaking with Bishop Fox security consultant Marco Sanchez about hardware hacking, how he got into it, why embedded devices are such a fascinating target, and why some of his most interesting attacks started with a screwdriver instead of a keyboard. But first, I want to take a moment to look at what's happening around Bishop Fox and the broader security community this week. We have a couple on-demand sessions now. One is Beyond the Hype, what Mythos actually means for security teams. If you've been following the conversations around Anthropic's Mythos models, we recently sat down with Bishop Fox CEO and co-founder Vinny Liu, Cisco's Senior VP and CISO Jason Lish, and Vista's Managing Director and CISO Adrian Peters to separate the headlines from reality. That conversation is now available on our website on demand. Also on demand, Route to Debug, a friendly introduction to hardware hacking in English and Spanish. Our latest hardware hacking workshop is now available. If you're curious about embedded devices or just looking to get started, it's a great introduction. And of course, Shad, now that you're here, I have to plug SummerCon coming up July 10th. And 11th in Brooklyn, where you're going to be presenting new research on fuzzing Spark-Plug B, an industrial protocol used throughout modern manufacturing. Last week, I invited people to come give you a hard time at the con. So
Absolutely.
you're welcome.
And also, like, the second part of that is hardware hacking. Like, I bought a device to test on, and I was like, well, what would happen if I take the top off this case? Oh, hey, look, that's a UART connection. So
Look what I just found.
Usually what I tell people is if I can put my hands on your stuff, it's not your stuff anymore. So
That's fair. That's a decent t-shirt. No.
I hope you have a good legal advisor.
All right, let's start this one off with one of those stories that, it sounds made up. It sounds like a TV show at first. I think of this story as a FIFA own goal, basically. A security reacher signs up to become a licensed FIFA football agent. A few minutes later, he's looking at the live stream infrastructure for the FIFA World Cup. The researcher, who goes by Bob the Hacker, registered through FIFA's public football agent platform, which is a legitimate service where prospective football agents verify their identity and receive an account. But that account was not isolated to a public portal. It was added to FIFA's primary Microsoft Entra tenant, the same identity system used by FIFA's internal applications. And when he browsed to FIFA's internal football data platform, the front end correctly displayed access denied. Good, because he had no assigned roles. But then the back end never checked. So once he bypassed the client-side guard, he found himself inside production systems supporting the World Cup, including the streaming management console responsible for ingesting and distributing live match feeds. According to the researcher, the panel exposed RTMP ingest URLs, stream key, preview feeds, and controls capable of starting or stopping live broadcasts. He also found access to commentator systems, match management tools, editorial workflows, and internal development resources. Basically everything. After struggling to find anyone at FIFA willing to receive a vulnerability report, he eventually contacted MediaKind, CISA, and the FBI before the issue got fixed. FIFA ultimately remediated the flaw, but never responded directly to the hacker. So he started with a completely legit account. And in this case, once you realize you've landed inside the same identity tenant as your target, what's your next move? Like, it's almost like a kid in a candy store. What do you start doing?
The answer
I'm going to just jump in because I was on vacation last week, and because of my location, I wasn't able to stream some of these FIFA games. And I would have loved to have had this because I would have just been watching games. But
Chad is Bob, confirmed.
I would be. It seems like he's probably better than me. But And I think he did everything right. Like from both an attacker and, like a security expert, like
Yeah.
he enumerated it. He tried to inform them, when he couldn't. Literally, they tell you, if you can't get a hold of anybody here, you contact like CISA and they will help you out on that. So
Yeah.
It's also one of those things where I don't know if it has a responsible disclosure program. So he's definitely running a little bit of a risk there by doing the testing that he was doing. But this isn't an uncommon issue of having front end controls and then just forgetting to put anything on your back end stuff. I mean, we've seen that before. It's not super unique, but it is super unique that they didn't have any role or any requirements on being on the corporate VPN or anything like that
Yeah.
to get to these endpoints. So.
Do you think that has to do with this being the World Cup and it's not like say MLB where they've got a system that they do year after year after year, and this is just like a one event that they had to spin something up for?
In my opinion, probably it was just, since it's internal stuff, I'm sure it's been up for a while, and
Yeah.
that this vulnerability has probably just been there, and nobody has said anything about it or identified it. Because I mean, it's a little bit of a roundabout thing. I think you kind of need to know about the API endpoints to talk to them in the first place. So maybe this person had a legitimate way of watching this in the first place and just happened to view some API endpoints and make some educated guesses about what API endpoints these things might talk to. So maybe some extra stuff going on, but from the article, it's not clear because they don't really have direct quotes. So
Yeah. And that is one thing I was going to mention, right? Like you need to have certain degree of awareness to try and enumerate these type of things. I mean, it's not to say it's obvious, right? But you're attacking company that is streaming TV, so you are going after the streaming platform, right? So it kind of makes sense in that perspective. But at the same time, it's like not necessarily unheard of, right? Like what those actors that go after pirating live streams, they do stuff like this, right? They want the key for the RTMP stream that is a very specific protocol, and they just plug that to a VLC. I think Bob, I was reading the blog, I think Bob the hacker actually did something similar. He plugged that to
Yeah.
VLC, and then they just recast the thing, right? So it's not, that is what surprises me, right? It's kind of a common attack. I know the point of entry perhaps was kind of weird, and again, a trust issue, but it's like the jewels of the crown of a company that those live streaming is the actual streaming, right? That's their service. It's not like other companies, they protect the private information. But no, in this case, it's literally the streaming. So why are you not trying to protect that of all things, right? That is what is super weird.
That is, it's the crown jewels, yeah.
it could be a legacy issue where some integration some way back when I couldn't do auth or whatever, and they just kind of left it and like, I don't know why this is this way, and I don't want to touch it because now I have to redo a bunch of things probably. So it's probably also why it took them a long time to fix or not respond, because they're probably panicking a little bit. They didn't know how to respond. They didn't want to probably anger the individual and have them do something with this. So yeah, it's
we talk
risky all
about
around.
These kind of like slow response windows sometimes and how much you can get done in a certain amount of time. But from an attacker's perspective, it's almost like, what does it mean when there's just no response? Like it's almost like I can't imagine. The sky's the limit, you know?
And I've been on both sides of that, where you report a vulnerability and they're like, this is the person you're going to talk to from now on. We are going to fix this thing immediately. Let us know. And you send it into an email and it's just crickets. And you're like, I don't know.
Everyone. Yeah.
I don't want to touch that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's just, if he was, I guess, a less kind person, I would never do this, but if you look up like on Temu, you can just buy like streaming sticks from like China, and they basically have every unlocked streaming service.
Sure.
And those would be valuable. And
We'll talk about those later.
And it's literally like stealing money from FIFA. That's where they get their money, I believe, is through
Right.
like licensing. Like I'm assuming it's a he with the name Bob. It was like he was trying to do the right thing and like let them know, like he probably could have monetized this in multiple ways.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of weird though that the way he got there, in theory, is
It seems
weird.
like he kind of had an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This wasn't like a stumbled onto kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is what I was saying, right? Like, there is some kind of awareness
Mhm.
on why he was after this. And sorry, just to clarify, I just checked his blog. She goes by Shide
Okay.
about the
Yeah.
hacker. Just to clarify.
I did
Yeah.
not check. So
My
Yeah.
bad. Yeah.
No. I think
Assumptions. Here we are with assumptions, right?
that's how, yeah.
We talk about it all the time. We got burned. All right. Up next, we have from Bleeping Computer. This is like the fourth time we've had to reference this XKCD comic with the block tower that says all modern digital infrastructure, and there's a little tiny block at the bottom that's a random project someone in Nebraska has been maintaining. This week, that random little project is FFmpeg. Researchers at JFrog disclosed a new vulnerability dubbed Pixel Smash, a heap corruption bug in FFmpeg's magic IUV decoder. Under the right conditions, they demonstrated remote code execution against a Jellyfin media server because Jellyfin automatically scans for metadata after files land in the media library. So while that RCE chain requires additional conditions, the bigger story is how widely FFmpeg is embedded. Jellyfin, Kodi, OBS Studio, Nextcloud, PhotoPrism, and hundreds of other projects inherit functionality and risk from that same library. And that little vulnerable decoder came along for the ride. So being embedded in hundreds of downstream products that never explicitly chose to include this decoder, it's kind of a transitive dependency. What does that look like for you guys as attackers? What does that look like for your attack surface?
I'm going to key Kendrick up because he is probably the person who can answer my question
He's
on here.
just itching.
So,
All right.
so I read it and I was like, I understand parts of this, but basically they use an odd number for the chroma frame, which gets ceiling rounded up. So you get 640 bytes or bits. I can't remember if it's bytes or bits. You get 640 bytes or bits because of that, using an odd number instead of an even number. What could Kendrick, exploit dev extraordinaire, do with that? I mean, obviously they pop shell. So
Well,
like,
yeah, I mean, they're at the end of the day, they're looking to achieve some type of overflow, underflow, whatever, some type of control over the stack frame in some realm, right? So in this particular way, they essentially were able to do enough of these frames over a long enough time that they were able to achieve essentially RCE at the end of the day, which is great, right? But I think the vulnerability is a little bit of one of those ones where you're going to notice it pretty quickly. And I don't know how quickly this exploit can actually happen because I believe the frames still have to be processed. If
it
I'm
was some
reading,
sort of like when it flushed it, like when it deallocated that, like it kind of got added in. So
yeah, that one byte, I think it was 1 byte every time they processed a frame. Yeah, so I think it still had to like go on for a little bit. So achieving a RCE is probably only like reasonable in like the automated ones that automatically processed your video, but I would have to dive into this particular one deeper to actually see if like, if an end user launched a video, would they be like, oh, this video doesn't work, and then be able to close it before like it actually did something.
Right.
But I did not read into this one as deeply as you're asking me questions about. So
it wasn't even about this one. I'm just asking, like,
Yeah.
as an exploit dev, if I gave you like, hey, you can override this much on the stack. Like,
yeah,
how
I mean,
weird do you get. So
your ultimate goal is to achieve just some type of control over the stack or an instruction pointer to get to where you want to go instead of where the program wants to go, right? So this is, I would say, on the slower side, one byte at a time, if I'm reading this correctly again. 1 byte at a time, that's pretty slow, and you have to trigger that every time. I mean, it's slow in the realm of like building a payload, but it's not that slow in like reality, right? It can happen in a literally a second, right, to do your whole entire payload. So
Right.
it's existence.
the one
And I think
go ahead. So
no, I think the premise that Kendrick sets is important, right? Like, perhaps it's gonna be really intricate if you want to exploit like OBS, Kodi, those, but particularly for Slack, Discord, Telegram, right, where you have a lot of like resources being shared and you click on play. It literally depends on how fast you close it, right? Like, maybe you click play and you went away, right? Like,
Yeah.
with how like the chances of that is, they're not impossible, but they're really slim. Maybe what I'm seeing or how I'm envisioning this type of attacks is if you have really unsupervised servers running these different interfaces. Like the ones that caught my attention were Genome, KDA, XFCE, the desktop environment, just because you can have unsupervised servers generating the thumbnails in a remote, literally in a remote server that is used for media sharing, something like that. Perhaps that's a use case where you will have this, like, it doesn't matter that it's slow, right? Because it will just keep reading it. But yeah, the premise that Connor says is like, well, how easy or how hard will be this versus like, I don't know, trying to get an account in the Entra ID of an organization like FIFA, right? Like, which one do you want to do?
My concept was a lot weirder because they had smart TVs, which covers a lot of real estate. And I was like, well, I would just buy a bad ad because a lot of them serve ads now. I was like, I would just drop a bad
Yeah.
ad and then you can't even get rid of it. You can't close it. So
Yeah.
but
There's no one can get rid of ads. Yeah. Huh. Well, so I thought it was kind of interesting also Nextcloud declined to patch this because they literally said it's not my bug, right? What's that say about like how like vendors consider their attack surface and what operators actually control?
I mean, if you have a RCE in your application, you have an RCE in your application, right? I mean,
Right.
fix it. Like it's like Windows of like you have a Windows vulnerability, and sure, it's not your vulnerability, but like you should probably do something to make sure that people can't reach that vulnerability. It's still your responsibility as a vendor. Like if I'm offering Windows as a service and I know of a vulnerability in my Windows endpoints, and my customers getting popped left, right, and center, and I'm like, oh, it's not my problem, it's Windows' problem. It's like, no, you probably should put up a firewall rule or
Yeah.
some rule to make sure that you aren't just allowing that to happen. So
Okay.
I don't think it's a
That was
valid
my
excuse.
inclination. I feel like
I think that's reasonable.
I think my fairly reasonable take on this, and I think I've ranted about this before, is if you're making money off of a product and you ingest open source projects, maybe you should give some of those resources to the people if you want something fixed. Right.
yeah.
I mean this, I know this is completely anti-capitalism. I'm going to brand myself, but like if you need that fixed in a timely manner for your thing to make money, reach out to the open source project and say, we would like this patched. And it doesn't even have to be like money. It could be something like, hey, we'll help you with the patch, or we'll help you with the code review. We'll help you with the regression testing. It's
Just jump into it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like it's all of our internets. We're kind of all responsible for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think for organizations, it will be really hard to, like, in terms of your attack surface, right? Like, how do you detect across all of your systems if you have an embedded thing like this? I don't think it's that easy. I think you will be, an RC, it's an RC, no matter how slow it is, if you
Mhm.
will. But it will be really hard to identify all of the embedded systems that could have something like this, right? Like, simply looking at, like, I'm familiar with OBS Studio, right? Because I do streaming. And
Mhm.
I know there is like at least 5 different streaming platforms that rely on OBS Studio in the backend. So it's
Yeah.
like double embedded systems that are potentially vulnerable to this, and they probably don't know about it, right? So in your attack surface, trying to detect all of that, I think that is very tricky. And maybe we will hear about this in a few weeks, few months. I don't know.
Yeah. Stay tuned, everyone. Man. All right. Well, we continue to see attackers shifting away from compromising companies one at a time and instead look for organizations that already sit in the middle of dozens or hundreds of trusted relationships similar to that. This week, the new unlucky company was Klue, a competitive intelligence platform that connects into customer environments like Salesforce, Gong, and HubSpot. This from TechCrunch. According to Huntress, an extortion group calling itself Icarus gained initial access using a legacy credential tied to an old integration that had never been decommissioned. From there, they pushed a malicious update that harvested the OAuth tokens Klue used to access customer environments. And that was the crown jewels of this story. Rather than attacking Salesforce itself, Icarus just used Klue's delegated access, making roughly 900 API calls into customer Salesforce instances and exfiltrating CRM data, including contacts, quotes, sales communications. At least 9 organizations confirmed that they were infected, including Huntress, HackerOne, Jamf, Recorded Future, Sneak, and Tanium. This all came from a credential tied to an integration prototype that was abandoned but never cleaned up. So, what does that say about how attackers think about these kind of legacy access and credential sprawl inside a SaaS vendor like this?
Yeah. I always like to think about this kind of the other way around, right? Like, why are companies aware, are we aware that those are actually legitimate accesses, right?
Mm.
That in terms of like logging capabilities, in terms of detection, what you will see is valid login with a valid credential in a valid system in probably business time. If the attacker is really advanced, they will try to connect between 8 to 5 p.m. Eastern,
Yeah.
I think that's the problem, right? Like they are pivoting from a stolen credential abandoned somewhere, like just decommission your application, your integrations, please.
Yeah.
They're pivoting from that to Salesforce, and it's like, well, they're not doing anything bad, right? Like trying to read one byte at a time, trying to get a shell. They're not doing that. They're doing a valid credential, right? Like, what are the steps you are taking to monitor that kind of stuff? Like these are real attacks, right? I know breach reports and intelligence reports always tend to be like very noisy about like, yeah, the Middle Eastern hacker community is launching massive exploits against all of the world. It's like, no, they have valid credentials and are just accessing the systems and stealing the data. They are literally reading what data is sensitive in your environment and just getting that data, right? As easy as that. So I think what it means for me is what are steps that we as a security community are doing to monitor that kind of stuff, right? Like, hey, are you checking that all of your authorized credentials, when was the last time they logged in? Isn't it that suspicious that you just have a random login at this specific time? Hey, we are seeing a lot of like network activity from this account. Like, is that normal? Is normal to see 3 terabytes of data in a single TCP connection? Maybe not, right? Like,
Monitoring behaviors. Yeah.
yeah, that is what we need to look at. Not only the exploits being launched, but also the actual activity internally of what is going on. And I think this pivots back to the first story, because yes, if you steal the API key and the stream URL and you stream it somewhere else, it's a valid thing, right? Are you monitoring all of the stream activity you are doing to avoid that, avoiding piracy in your streaming, perhaps? It's a similar situation, right? Like, what steps are you doing? And I think this is kind of the same thing, right? Like, in terms of hacking, well, no, they are doing normal activity with a normal user, right?
And it looks like even Klue was like, we don't know where that credential came from. Like they who knows how many else they have,
Chaos theory.
So
it's not uncommon to find credentials that just happen to work. Doing operations for 3 years here, I've found countless just API tokens on disk, username credentials on disk, and just, okay, where do I now I have these credentials, and then I just spray them across their whole entire organization. I'm like, wow, I just logged into like 5 different things. Great. Now I get to go look at these 5 different things. What do these things do? One's a streaming service. Great. All right. And now I can watch your cameras for free.
Or the World Cup.
Yeah, it's great. It's a good time. Yeah.
We've seen this playbook before, right? This is SalesLoft, Gainsight, and now Klue. Am I off base, or is this kind of like the preferred path into an enterprise environment now?
I think it's an easier path. Like,
Yes.
like building exploits hard.
Yeah.
Either buying or obtaining credentials seems easier. It's probably easier to get by like incident response and detection. I do think if you're going to name yourself Icarus, you should probably read that story, like just see how that ends.
Yeah.
Like it's like those business access brokers where you can just buy access or buy like SIM swaps and stuff. They exist for a reason, which is data has value, and if you're willing to spend some money to get access, perfect. So
yeah,
and it's just one of those things where it's easy, right? It's the lowest hanging fruit possible, and there's tons of data breaches every day. If you can buy it, you can make more money off of it, because then you can dump more credentials, and
the
it's
whole
probably
investment strategy.
it's a vicious cycle that IT really has to get locked down, because you shouldn't probably have your employee accessing data from the United States and then suddenly accessing it from some foreign country that is not within, a direct flight type of deal. Generally, you be able to detect that, a 13-hour flight doesn't exist between these 2 locations. You should probably block that and get it reported out.
You have identified a problem or a magic user.
Or magic, yes.
One of the 2. All right, before we get to our last story, I want to share a conversation I had earlier with Bishop Fox security consultant Marco Sanchez. He and Abdel Bolivar recently led our hardware hacking workshop in our Discord server. It was offered in both English and Spanish. They're both available on demand now on our site and on YouTube. We discussed how people get into hardware hacking in the first place, why it's becoming such an important skill for security practitioners, and touched on Dungeons and Dragons for good measure. Here's that interview. Marco, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sean. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun this week, but I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about hardware hacking, and I guess first off, just ask, what is it about hardware hacking that drew you in?
Oh yeah, it's probably I have a lot of fun on university with electronics, with not really complex electronics, but simple electronics, like creating some simple PCB boards and something like that. And also I joined a laboratory here in the university and start playing with some of the devices that they have. And it was really cool. So I fell in love like with the hardware and all the electronic things. And yeah, I started taking a look at some other people's work around hardware hacking and how they actually modify some of the devices that they have to make it perform other cool stuff things, or also some people that are looking for vulnerabilities. And it's like, oh, you know what? That's really cool. And I really want to try to do it. And it's like, oh, well, I have some old devices at home, and it start like looking at them, and it's like, well, they're old. You can do something else with that, right? And I start disassembling it and poking around, and I really enjoy it a lot to play with electronics, and it start like looking how it works, knowing, understanding how actually everything happens inside. So yeah, it was one of the things that drove me into hardware hacking.
Yeah. And what, for people who have never done it, I mean, it's obviously in security, you have different specialties, different fields. What makes hardware hacking so much different from something people think of more traditionally, like web app or cloud security?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think that the big difference between web application and cloud infrastructure or something else is like hardware devices normally has like a physical impact in the real world, right? So some applications also have some interaction with physical components, but hardware devices sometimes are used for like sensors that it's reading data, or also actuators that are changing the state of different machines or things like that. So yeah, you're not only interacting with the actual application, but also trying to trigger some real impact on what the devices is actually doing. And also sometimes, as mentioned in the workshop, it's not to find like security vulnerabilities, but also to sometimes modify the device, install an open source version of a software, or create a more capable device because the components already in the device are really powerful that can be put it to the limit. So yeah, I think that's the big difference, that not only we are looking for security vulnerabilities, but also for other workarounds or start using them, or also like, yeah, play with them and try to understand how they work in many other sense.
Yeah. So when you first get your hands on something like this, like you mentioned, you had old things lying around like routers or anything like that, a router IoT device. What are you looking for first?
The first thing that I'm looking to these devices, especially when I start hardware hacking and start to looking at hardware hacking, it's like if the device is actually easy to work in some way, and I can work with it with the available tools that I have. Because yeah, sometimes devices, for example, are ready to be outdoor devices, so yeah, they are covered like in epoxy resin or other resins or plastics that make harder to get to the components, or are also like really old devices that requires something that I don't have in hand. So yeah, I start to see what components actually the device has, and if it's possible to actually interact in a way with the component without like breaking the bank in buying expensive stuff or some additional gear that we need to actually start trying to rip it off the device.
I picture it, it's almost like shopping for a car. If you don't know cars, you just want the one that's the right color and looks
Yeah.
cool. But if you know them, you're thinking, I could take that thing apart and I could do this to it and I could do that to it. Like it's a different way to view these devices.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also like the functionality that they're gonna have if you want to actually make a sensor communicates with, for example, Home Assistant. Well, I don't wanna take apart a router because it's not make sense for me in that point. But if I want to start like seeking for security vulnerabilities, probably a router gonna be the best target because they not only have the hardware thing, but also like the web application and other interactions that a user has. So yeah, it's gonna depend on a lot on what I want to do with that device in particular.
Yeah. Do you find that being such a different field from so many other cybersecurity and infosec areas, do you find that people have like big misconceptions about hardware hacking? And if so, what are those?
Yeah, people think on hardware hacking like hacking to the device and exploit vulnerabilities and target only critical infrastructure of different countries, such as Stuxnet do with the PLCs, Siemens PLCs. But yeah, that's not only the case. You only want to hack or understand how a device works to actually match what you want to device to do. So if you are like building your smart home around a central platform, you want actually all the devices to use a simple application to control every one of them and not have like 10 different applications. So yeah, that's part also of the hardware hacking process and the reverse engineering process. People are gonna try to take apart the devices, understand how they can communicate, and sometimes also if they can flash new firmware or custom firmware that can actually enable them to do many other things. So yeah, hardware hacking gonna be around many different fields and around many different areas and also different objectives. Also, retro consoles has different anti-tamper things that people try to work around, reverse engineer, tear apart, and things like that to actually play not the original games, but other games that can be available at cheaper. That's also part of hardware hacking. So yeah, it's a really broad area and it's gonna depend a lot on what the people it's trying to do rather only like security
I
constraints.
think people do tend to think of it as a security thing,
Yeah.
but it's so much more. It's also just making stuff do what you want it to do.
Yeah.
It's owning that piece of hardware.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
that's interesting. I think you mentioned before, like when you got started, you thought about what you had lying around, what tools you had. And I think that's something that maybe might intimidate some people as a roadblock is that they think they need some kind of big, expensive lab or something like that. But from sitting in on your workshops, it really feels like that's not the case. Like, what do you actually need to get started?
Yeah, definitely. That's a common misconception as well, and probably is one that I have at some point because I think like, oh, I don't have all this fancy gear that this blog post showed or this person showing this video or something like that. But yeah, when I start to like, sit down and start playing with some old routers, I said, all right, I don't need the more expensive gear. I just need a basic multimeter, probably a USB to TTL adapter to communicate with the router, and something to dump the firmware. In this case, like a small CH341A, I think it's called this SPI reader, and that was it. And you can gather that from pages like AliExpress or in local hardware stores for sometimes less than $20, $10, which is like really accessible. And also the multimeter, it's probably optional if you know what you are doing, but it's better to have it. So yeah, you can have a full kit with around $30 and should be good to go with many of the devices that you have at home. Because yeah, also a common error that people probably gonna think it's like, well, I need to buy a new device, the latest technology or something like that. But you are going to be fine to learn the basics with devices that you already have in home. For example, your old routers, if you have a security camera that it's not working anymore or you are not using it anymore, you can use it. Or if you are like me and buy a lot of different IoT devices and never use it, it's like, you know what? Let's tear it apart and see what is going on.
Yeah, all the things you mentioned, almost all. There's a couple trips to the hardware store, but almost everything you mentioned here and in the workshop, I have just sitting around the house. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't be that hard to get started. I think hardware hacking is something that really 20 years ago we didn't talk about, and at least not the way we do now. How do you see the role that hardware hacking plays now compared to, say, like 5 or maybe even 10 years ago?
Well, it's actually a completely different landscape of what devices are now connected to the internet because 10 years, 5 years, or we don't think like about an intelligent washing machine connected to the internet to do what, I don't know what, but yeah, it's connected to the
I don't
internet.
either. Why? Yeah. But
Yeah.
people do it. Yeah. It's big.
Oh,
It's big.
And also, if you have your smart fridge for doing, I don't know why, but yeah, connected to the internet. So yeah, definitely hardware hacking is placing a really interesting spot right now because there are many devices connected into the internet, and there are going to be more and more, not only like home devices like fridges, washer machines, and smart plugs or something like that, but also there are many industries that are turning to IoT devices to manage infrastructure like critical infrastructure, electrical grids, transportation, logistics, industrial machines. So yeah, all of that stuff is making the way into the mainstream. And yeah, these devices normally are created and put it in production, and they're going to live like 10, 20 years for there without any support or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So
People aren't
yeah.
going to just shut them down on their own. They don't know to do that.
Yeah.
Or they can't afford it. Sometimes you're managing a whole fleet or something, and you don't
Yeah.
want to replace that on every single vehicle. That can be big.
Yeah. And that's because, in home we can replace our intelligent smart bulb, but a company cannot probably replace like the thousands of different devices that are connected to its network at once because, yeah, it's really expensive. And if it works, well, sometimes it's not really a way to justify the cost of doing this. But yeah, and because of this big number of devices, people is like turning into hardware hacking to seek for security vulnerabilities because as these devices sometimes run old versions or updated versions of software, they are going to be vulnerable to some things that probably are 10 or 5 years old. And yeah, people is trying to exploit it to actually create botnets or actually use it in other big attacks or big scale attacks.
Yeah. Well, if someone listening to this wanted to dip their toes into hardware hacking this weekend, what is a recommended first project, like first device you might recommend they start with?
Yeah, I think like an old router is probably the best project you're going to have because old routers, especially the ones that are like for 10 years or 5 years ago, are really, really cheap routers that doesn't come with really fancy features. And because are targeted for home use, you don't require support for 300 or 500 clients at once. So yeah, you're going to be seeing that there are simple devices with a single processor. And yeah, you can actually perform many of the basic things that are covered also in the workshop, for example, like dumping firmware, communicating through UART devices. And the most important thing is that probably you have one laying around in some boxes or in some places in your home. So
If not, message me. I will sell you mine. I've got like 2 or 3 of them down here.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the best project that you can have. If you have a device at home, start with it and try to see what you can do. The objective is not to have a CVE or something crazy, but start learning the basics and also don't break the bank account or go and spend a lot of money on many different gear because yeah, it's like the first steps. You are going to learn a lot. You're probably gonna spend a lot of time learning the basics, and yeah, you can start then if you like it a lot, which probably gonna be, and there's no turning backs. You are gonna try to start buying and collecting different devices that I probably analyzed that I'm probably gonna take a look at this. Yeah, and then you can start poking around with many other devices that you came across.
Now, is it like any other hobby that you can get started for $20, but the more you get into it, the more money you sink into it, and it just like I'm thinking of Dungeons and Dragons. You buy one book, and then suddenly your whole budget goes to it, or video game collecting, or any of that.
Yeah, definitely. And you start to see like different devices, hardware devices that are really esoteric devices, like how this traffic controller works. And you want to have that on eBay or some other used marketplace and try to get your hands on one. And yeah, it's definitely that's going to be like many hobbies.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Marco, thank you so much for joining us. And if you would like to check out the workshop for yourself, Route to Debug is now available on our website and on YouTube, both in Spanish and English. And we'll include links to both versions in the show notes. Marco, thanks a lot for stopping by.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, our last story asks a pretty uncomfortable question. What if the attacker isn't coming from some foreign IP address or suspicious cloud provider? What if, at least from your firewall's perspective, the call is coming from inside the house, or at least your neighbor's house? Pretty close. For years, defenders have built detection around simple assumptions. Malicious traffic looks different from normal traffic. It comes from a suspicious country cloud provider, a known bad IP address, but we can't keep doing that. The Wall Street Journal reported this week that there's a growing use of residential proxy networks, millions of compromised routers, smart TVs, and IoT devices that quietly relay internet traffic on behalf of someone else. According to the report, Microsoft traced activity from the Russian state-backed group Midnight Blizzard through infrastructure operated by a Chinese residential proxy provider called IP-IDEA. Instead of attacking directly from infrastructure they control, attackers are just routing operations through ordinary home internet connections, making malicious traffic look like it came from your neighbor instead of a nation state. The result is some of the assumptions we've built on modern detections, like IP reputation, geolocation, whether traffic originates from a residential ISP, become way less useful. If attackers can now source traffic from millions of real residential IP addresses, what assumptions in current detection and response tooling break down, and how do defenders start to think about maybe rebuilding those signals?
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite topics, right? Like how to detect weird stuff that is not weird, that is normal, right? Like because granted, it's easy. It's easy to detect an incoming denial of service from an IP in a country you don't do business with, right? Like that. Yeah, that's easy.
Sure.
I think what we need to do as defenders is start looking at how our users normally behave, right? I think that's the primary thing. It really depends on the type of business you are. But let's say you have a system where you have accounts where users can register their accounts, right? Instead of like, hey, I'm seeing new activity from an IP that has never registered an account. Okay, that would be weird, right? And it's a simple indicator that you can start using. And it's this idea, it's changing the mindset of instead of looking for malicious traffic, just look for things that are not telling you a complete story, right? Like, okay, I'm seeing this IP that registered an account in 2015, something like that, and has logged in 3 times across 5 years, which is not necessarily weird, right? Okay, maybe that's a normal user because our platform doesn't require you to be there at all times. Something like that. You need a lot of that retention. You need a lot of like hands-on. Yes, it's expensive, but I think the point is, how are you changing mindset of how attackers are doing like what they are doing, right? Which is not necessarily sending exploits, which is like buying credentials in the darknet and then reusing those credentials to access systems.
Yeah.
Because I think the first time I saw there was this market, there was this market, they sold you like access to proxy IPs at thousands, right? Like you could build thousands of proxy chains that are home ISPs. And the problem for me is the ISP. A lot of them changed how they are giving you the accounts, and they give you like default routers with default credentials, and they can manage those remotely using those default credentials. So what attackers are doing is just using that same logic of, hey, if the ISP can manage this device, I will do the same, and I do a kind of a proxy VPN tunnel to the home, and I attach my new exit node, right? So it's basically the same thing, just applied for a malicious purpose. But the idea is knowing that is happening. One is let's look at ISPs and how they're behaving. Change your default passwords. It applies for your home router as well, right?
Yeah.
And look at really weird behaviors. Not again, it's not only about like malicious traffic that is actually malicious, but it's user behavior. It's platform behavior, right? It's amount of data. If you have an static platform, right, that serves bytes of data, then where you're seeing a connection that is a terabyte, that is not normal, right? And that's something you normally don't monitor, like how long the connections at the TCP protocol are happening, right? You are not a platform that receives UDP traffic, and then you see UDP traffic. Is that normal? Well, no, right? What are you doing to monitor that? And I think that's what needs to change. The mindset of how you are looking at things to detect actual malicious attacks, not only random exploits.
Yeah, and the ISPs are in the right place to see, 1 million connections at a time, and they statistically can look at those. I remember seeing a talk in like maybe 2009. And they were talking, I believe it was a DARPA discussion where they were like, no, we're just using statistics. We're catching hackers because like those people like to use IPs instead of names. And we're matching up traffic without a DNS lookup. And that's how they were catching people inside government networks. And I was like, okay, like somebody like with obviously much more statistics knowledge than me sat down and was like, how can we catch these people? And I think it's like he was saying, it's at some point it's not a cool, sexy detection. It's like I sat down and looked at my top 10,000 net flows on my router, and this is, like this was the fix. So
Yeah.
I think the next part of this about the commercializing it, that's the real story. So
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. Now talk about that. What does that commoditization mean for like the new threat landscape?
Well, so the best part of that is like there are services out there that do this for you, and it's free for the person that installs it. They get something out of it. So a lot of the times it's you install this random proxy that is free. It doesn't have like restriction on upload or download limits, and you get to use it for free. But the downside is now somebody can come. The other side of that whole program is that they can come and pay to use residential proxies, and you're just hosting a residential proxy for that person. And it's so they don't even have to exploit stuff. And like people just do that. Like people just set this up and they do it for free.
Willingly. Yeah.
And it's insane. But like, yeah, there are people that do actually hack devices and then set these things up for themselves to build their own networks and commercialize it outward after that. But like there exists both apparently, and you can just ask users to install it for you, and they will. So yeah,
if something is free, you're the product, right?
And people don't understand like the ramifications of like you're running a residential proxy. All of their traffic and what they're doing is going through your IP address. So, whatever they're doing, you'll get the jury summons to come and explain why you were doing whatever they were doing. Right? So it's risky, but those services exist and people freely do it.
I barely trust what my kids are doing on my router, let alone some rando that's paying me under the table for it.
Yeah, because the website said you will get free Robux, right?
Well, like what is that person solving, right? They want probably like some access to some like geo-restricted content, whatever.
World Cup games when they're on vacation.
Exactly. World Cup games while you're on vacation, whatever, right? And like that's all they see. Like, and there's like, oh, I can just download, like I can download this thing, and it gets unlimited download. Great. I don't have to worry about like a VPN slowing down my connection because. Some VPNs do that, right? They don't like you to stream content on their VPN, so they make that a pain, right? So, but you see these free services that then stand up a residential proxy, and then who knows what that's being used for? Hopefully, it's good stuff.
Yeah,
but probably not.
And this is where I said we were going to talk about it again. Any of those little like sticks that you can plug in and you have everything for free, like you're dipping your toes into some nasty water, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, because it doesn't have to be powerful, right? Like they just have to be able to service an internet connection. And we've seen those Roku devices or, insert a generic product here that plugs into the USB port of your TV and gets power and then has a Wi-Fi connection, right? So it's dangerous.
So you're sailing the seas, and there's a Kraken out there waiting for you.
There's a few things that I stay away from in my life because I've met me and I know who I am. And one of the things was for like a few $1,000s, you could buy a line side cable like sniffer, like for cable internet, because it's like a shared pool. And then I was like, and I can buy storage. I'd need a few terabytes of storage. I bet there's a lot of like clear text goodness on that side. And I was like, no, you're about to go to jail. So don't buy one of those.
If you own all the infrastructure and you get a pen test, agreement, set it up. But otherwise, you probably
Yeah,
shouldn't.
don't even think about it.
I
All
think
right,
about
well,
it. I just don't do it.
yes, only in dreams. All right, that wraps it up for this week's Initial Access. Shad, Sergio, Kendrick, thank you so much, as always, for joining. And a special thanks to Marco Sanchez for stopping by earlier to talk about his and Abdel's new workshop, Route to Debug, a friendly introduction to hardware hacking. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a friend or coworker. And if there's a story you'd like us to cover in a future episode, let us know. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, and we will catch you all next week.